I get the opportunity to introduce my friend John Trotter. He's going to be sharing about his ministry that he's doing. And yeah, perfect. Nope, just the middle one. Perfect. Thank you, man. We met because we are fortunate enough to rent at a great deal. We get an amazing deal for our office space there at the law firm in Paulsbo, at Tizano, and I forget all the partners' names. There we go. West Sound Legal. Thank you. It's where Heidi works. So we're really fortunate. And one day John came in and we started chatting. Of course, Trish meets everybody, so Trish cornered him. And we got to talking and found out he's a believer, and we shared a little bit of a story, and then I forced him to have pupusas with me at the pupusa place, the Salvadoran place, and that is how I rope people into coming to our church, is Salvadoran food. So I am really excited. Once he started talking about this ministry that he has, I am so excited for him to share with us for some time this morning. So John, if you'll welcome John, and he's going to come up and share about his ministry.
Hello. Can you hear me? All right. So I heard that you didn't have any singing this morning, so I'm going to sing a song. I'm just joking. I don't sing. So I just want to start, like Dave said, my name is John Trotter. I'm an attorney here in Paulsbo, and I currently live out in Seebeck, which is pretty far. But really just here to just share some of my story with you, and also what our organization does. And I'm really excited. This is something that's been years in the working. I just had the privilege to work down the hall from Dave, and then I moved to another office down the hall even further from Dave. But it still works out just to share things together. So I really want to just start by sharing a verse that is important to me. It kind of goes into what we'll be talking about today. And so Proverbs 22:6 says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, even when he is old, he will not depart from it." And that really is a good summary of what our organization is doing. And so a few years ago, my wife, Amy, and I started a nonprofit organization called the Trotter Family Foundation, and the whole focus of that is focusing on youth who age out of the foster care system. If you've never heard of that term, aging out, it's just when a youth turns 18, and in some states 21 if they're finishing high school, they no longer are qualifying as a foster child. So they age out of that system and they go into either independent living, go to school, or worse in some cases. And so what we want to focus on is really building skills and just preparing for that transition. And one thing I always say is that transitions shouldn't be such a surprising thing. Most kids, when they grow up, that's what you do. You leave home, hopefully before the age of 30 for some, and then you go out on your own. And so I don't want it to seem like such a novel idea, but what we really want to focus on is just how to prepare young people for that transition and how to be a community. So you can go to the next slide. I can't remember what's on it. But when we were thinking of how we would implement this, I thought there were 4 major areas that summed up how to approach this. And I say it's communication, sorry, not community, there you go. Community, education, opportunity, and service. And the major pennant to that would be the community. Many of youth who transition out of that system, they transition without any familial or community connections. So they're out on their own. They're there to figure out the world and how it works and how to support themselves. And I think each of these pillars kind of feed into the next. And so whether you go to school or some kind of vocational program, whether you are trying to get a job, those are the areas that is the next step for youth. So I believe that everyday people, members of the church body, people that work at the grocery store down the street, your neighbors, I think you can be involved in doing what is really just contact work, being in someone's life and just being a mentor to them and walking alongside them. And so I think there's so many organizations that do really amazing work. And so I think we get to partner with them, we get to learn from them, we go to the trainings. But I think what really is our focus is saying, I just want everyday people to know how to address and respond in a trauma-informed community. If someone comes to you and they say, this is where I'm at in life, I don't think we need to say, I think I have a book that I can give you or a place I can send you, we can be the hands and feet of Jesus by saying we'll step in and give you some advice. And so I wasn't planning on sharing this, but I'll just share some of the details. I was wondering, well, how does this work? And just recently, someone contacted me on Instagram and said, I have someone who's a foster parent. They are very anxious because their foster child is turning 18 and they have no idea what to do next. And I was like, hey, that's what I do. And so it was such an amazing thing just this last week, and I didn't know how that would work out. And I said, well, there's resources we have, and really just having a conversation. And I've seen people who are in that place, and they may not know what to say or may not know where to send someone, but really it's not such a uncommon thing just to say, here's some things you might want to prepare for, and here are some ways we can walk alongside you. Next slide. And so I wanted to look at, so I grew up in Kansas, and so when I moved here to Washington, I wanted to look at what do things look like in my community, because if you aren't looking at your own, starting where you live and work and go to church, I think you miss a lot of opportunities. And so the foster care system has had some dramatic changes over the last decade, and unfortunately those trends just get worse every year. So you have about 400,000 youth around the nation in foster care, 10,000 in the state of Washington. And so the same amount of youth each year that transition out of the system are the same amount coming in. So it's just this cycle. And you're even seeing trends where former foster youth have children who are also going into that system. So you're seeing kind of these generational trends. And so what I think is really helpful is if you're like, I could never be a foster parent, I could never do that, I think it's helpful just to go to a training. The organization Olive Crest has a really good training called Foster Care 101, and I think it's a good way to just get an introduction. You don't sign up at the end of it, and then they say, we're going to send a kid to your house tomorrow. You really get that opportunity to learn of what this looks like. And so I think we have to know what the statistics are, know what the numbers are, and know what does the makeup look like in our local communities. Next slide. And so one of the most surprising things to me as I was doing my research and preparing just over the last years is that since 2007, there's been a 53% increase of children entering into foster care. And when I looked at this, I couldn't find a lot of condensed topics about, well, why are children going into foster care? Why are we not looking at this? And I've been somewhat critical since I was a young person of the system, because I realized the trends have stayed the same for the last decade, but the responses have not really changed as much. And so the reason we started an organization is because I believe a lot of people can do such small little steps in their own way, not necessarily trying to figure out how do we make these dramatic shifts, because that's what Congress and the legislature do. They pass laws to try to make dramatic shifts that really don't address the root causes. And so when you look at these areas, I want to just look at the two middle ones, just drug abuse and overdose. That's just a huge area, and there's so many organizations that are focusing on that. And so I think that's a good way to start, is addressing that. And then the next area is just neglect. And I think if we still look at that neglect area, I found it interesting. The underlying issue to that is still back to drug abuse and overdose. And so there's so many coalitions that I think do good work. The Substance Abuse Coalition in Bremerton is a good way to just be introduced to some of the areas, because if we hit some of those root causes, it may affect generations of youth in this circumstance. And so I think when we look at this, I think I'll talk about it a little bit later. But I kind of think, well, where do you start? And I think advocacy has to be that first step. You have to identify the issues, identify what the problem is, and then you can start doing something about it. But oftentimes when I've spoken with people, foster care is this sort of stigma in society that you don't think about. And then once you age out, it never really comes back into your life as a conversation, because you don't wear that around you everywhere you go. No one knows that could be part of your story. And so when I looked at, in this area, you have, 600 youth aging out every year, which means they've met that definition of no longer qualifying for care. And that extended foster care can go to age 21, but I honestly think the major transition in a young person's life is sort of that 18 to 26. I'm only 30, so I feel like that's really old to me, but it's for some of you probably not. But I feel like that's 18 to 26 is a very specific age group. I'm not too far removed from that, and that's a very important time to know the life skills that you need to learn to be able to independently survive and take care of yourself. And so the questions that I want to pose and I want people to really think about on that fourth bullet point are just, where do you live after you age out? Do you go back with your birth family? What about holidays? Who is your family? Where do you go for help? And part of my story is I was one of those youth who aged out of foster care, and I hear this question all the time. Go back with your birth family, and I thought, do you not realize that the reason I was in foster care, and that may not be the best option? And so it really is, holidays are something very different. And so for me, I was very young when I first went into the system, and I went from living in the inner city of the largest city in Kansas, very multicultural city, to living on a farm with a Dutch Christian Reformed family. And so you can imagine the cultural differences. They were more of a Rendon Collective family, and so I was more of a Lecrae probably person. And so I thought it was such a strange upbringing. I don't think I ever saw a cow before until I moved out to the farm. And I kid you not, just a few weeks ago, I had a call to get my immunization records, and it's such a small town that they said, sure. And I said, well, don't you want to know who this is calling and want some identifying information? And they said, well, do you still live out at the farm? I'm like, I'm 30. Like, no. So needless to say, they gave me the records. I was a little bit confused how quickly I was able to get them. So I think that was just such a formative time of my life. And then I thought, these are the questions that we need to be asking, because no one really knows your story once you age out of that system. And so the main question is, what happens next? What does that look like? And these are the numbers. I've always said my entire life, you're not defined by your circumstances. You can overcome your circumstances. It's not a self-help method. I believe the church is a huge part of that foundation. And so when I looked at the numbers, I thought these at least tell us where we are. Fewer than 3% graduate college, and many more are jobless. 1 out of 5 youth are homeless after age 18. 1 out of 4 are involved in the criminal justice system. And 71% of the women aging out are pregnant by age 21. And 60% of child sex trafficking victims have been in the child welfare system. Now, this is such a weird phase. Me and 3 of my siblings, we were all in the foster care system. So I'm not good at math, but 4 divides up equally, which is sad and true. But when you look at the 4 of us, these trends have hit all of us in this exact numbers. So my siblings, I've had those who have had children that they weren't able to care for and go into that system. One of us went to college, and then one of us was involved in the criminal justice system. I won't say which one. And so it's one of those things. It's like, these are real numbers. These are real statistics that we have to understand. We're not defined by them, but we can move beyond them. And so that's where we had to start and just say, what do the numbers look like? And when I went to law school, it was an even smaller minority of where I didn't see anybody in that realm. And it's kind of neat when you run into someone and you kind of are like, oh, you were in that system as well. And you start talking, you start learning from them and thinking, what can we do to have better outcomes? What can we do to come alongside someone who's in that situation, especially someone who's getting ready to age out? Because you can kind of get ahead of that. If it's already in that process, it's so difficult to kind of say, we'll meet you where you are, but where you are is a very tough place. And so I'll just touch on these briefly, but these are kind of what I see as the progression of how we actually meet this need. And so the advocacy portion is my favorite part, because I get to talk to people I'm like some of the behind-the-scenes work, just knowing what's going on there. But honestly, my wife takes care of most of that part of it, the administrative things. But getting into the advocacy where we're talking to people, we're in the community, and using the broader community as just a foothold to say, you guys probably have some skills that you could pass on to your own children and to youth who are in this place. You have some ways to talk about that first job and some mistakes to avoid. And then we are doing this in a series of workshops where we're really just providing a broader network. If someone is like, I really just need to figure out how to do budgeting like 99% of the rest of the country, and I need to figure out how to do that, there may be someone who has a really good way forward, and just sitting down with someone. So we started just doing workshops of every basic skill, writing a resume. We hop onto a Zoom call, we invite people to it, and we just walk them through it. Young people, I would say the hardest thing, and I feel like I'm still a young person, so this is me too. And all of you too, you're young people as well. So join me in this conversation. But young people, I think the hardest thing for them is to set goals. You could set goals all day long, but if you don't provide any meat to that, any progression or any objectives to that, those goals just sit there unmoving. So then you need to have objectives. What are the practical steps to getting to some of those goals, and are they attainable? And I really enjoy just hearing what people's thoughts are. You get all things. People say they're going to play in the NBA, and you're like, okay, that's a start. Let's see, what would it take to go? And you just walk through that. I think when a young person has the opportunity to try their skills at something, that verse that I read, it says, you teach someone and you show someone the way to go. You don't just tell them the way to go. And that's what's hard. I kid you not, there are some people who their parents have told them something their entire life, and then one of their friends may say it, and they're like, you're right. And the parents are like, what? That's what I've been saying. But sometimes that just is reaffirming, and it helps to say, you can do this. You have this opportunity to try at something. And if you live in this world of not having that ability to actually engage in some real world things, I think you live in this kind of bubble of saying, okay, when I get out there on my own, it's going to be very, very hard. And I just realized rent is like a monthly thing, not a once-a-time thing. So I think you have these life skills that all of you can teach and that you can engage in the workshops. And then my final kind of pennant to that is support. And what I looked at that as support and service kind of go together. I don't think people just need something. I think they need a way to be engaged in helping others. And the most exciting thing for me is when someone that we've been able to help then says, I have a friend who needs that same kind of help. I want to bring them in to this as well. And that's been so amazing. Now, my job as an attorney is unique every day. I told Dave earlier, and I was talking with another Dave and then another David, because there's a lot of here, but I don't do criminal law. But I had someone come to me with a criminal law issue, and I said, if you get arrested, do not make me your first phone call, because you're going to be sitting in jail for a little bit. And so I decided, this former foster youth came to me, and I was like, I don't do criminal law. And they're like, but I trust you. I was like, you shouldn't, because I don't know what I'm doing. But I took this case, and it was just the most bizarre case. A young girl got a traffic violation for being in a single vehicle car accident and was not served with that information. And so then had a warrant for not showing up to court, and then had all these additional fees and credit collections tacked onto that. I saw the injustice in that, and I was still like, I don't know, what to do here, because this is not what I do. So I got deployed to Korea last year. So from my barracks room closet during quarantine, I was able to represent this young girl over Zoom, and we got the case dismissed. I think what happened is I was just so annoying to the prosecutor. They were just tired of me, and they're like, fine, just stop. And so I was like, okay, so that's how it works. So the criminal justice system is not, I wouldn't say, there are some difficult parts of it, but I think when you're on that realm of justice, you have to be willing to help someone and figure out what do they actually need. How can we be the best help? And then you just have to be annoying, and then eventually you're able to really get to that place. So then I said, I want you to be involved in helping the next person and being of service. Like, this isn't just a place to say we need to help someone. We also need to show someone how to serve and show them how to be in a healthy community. So I'll just kind of breeze through these so you can skip past the 4 things I just talked about. So really what I see the next phase of this is becoming a resource expert. Now, I'm not sure if some of you are aware of Coffee Oasis. I see Michael back there. He used to work as a barista there, so I'm sure he has a good understanding of that, so talk to him. But when I was a case manager there, and I think this is recorded, but I'll just say, I felt like you had to be a resource expert on every resource available to any person, anywhere in their life, anywhere in Kitsap County. And it was very difficult. And I think what that taught me is we should kind of be that resource expert, even as an everyday person. So for example, if someone needs to get their birth certificate, how many of you, by a show of hands, would know how to help someone apply for their own birth certificate to get a copy of it? Okay, I'm taking your names down, taking your names down. So that's one of those realms that you find yourself in. And even for me, I was like, I don't really know how do you get a birth certificate? Where were you born? And I think that's one of those things that I think everyday people, you just as a mentor, you can go alongside someone, you can help provide these very practical needs, and then say, I not only was able to help you do something, but we're building a relationship. So really, I think everyone can become a resource expert. It's very difficult. We have such a huge housing crisis, but just knowing how to walk someone through that, you don't necessarily have to provide these amazing results, but just being able to walk them through that. And that's what I see. We have these workshops for youth and who are transitioning, and then we have these workshops for volunteers who just get to learn how to do something. Because honestly, when I first started talking with Dave over pupusas, which I was distracted already, I was talking with him and I said, I've seen this from the child side, the child in foster care side. I haven't seen it from the volunteer, the advocate side. So some of this stuff when I first started, I was like, I don't really know. Like, I'm not sure how this all worked. And I really didn't. I didn't know how you take these steps. But I do know that my first semester after college, they told me the dorms close. You can't stay in the dorms unless you pay extra. And I knew that I was like, well, where am I supposed to go? And so I was like, I guess, this family I haven't seen in many years, I'll start showing up at Thanksgiving and Christmases, and they'll be like, who are you? And I've had that happen where, as large families work, they're like, oh, you're so-and-so's nephew's cousin's son. And you're like, sure. And so I think that's a tough place to be. So I think just providing that was a real wake-up call to say, what do I do next? Where do I go? And I've had some amazing friends. I was in the community. I was in a church. I was in a place where people were like, you're going to come stay with us. We are a predominantly white family still, and we're going to teach you the ways of the white people. And so I was kind of like, this was a wake-up call for me, but what it taught me was I got to meet so many unique people, so many amazing stories out there. So I want to touch on 2 final points, and the main thing is, what are the basic needs? What are some basic things that people need to learn before transitioning? There's some really good resources out there. There's an app called Know Before You Go. I don't think it's just foster youth specific. I think any person who thinks they're ready to leave home needs to know some basic things, because I've seen people leave home and it can be a terrible time just getting your foot setting. And so just really teaching those things. Now I'll caveat this with saying, someone close to me said, a lot of this that you're talking about sounds like being a mom or being a parent. And I was like, well, yeah, that's what a parent ideally would be teaching their children. And so a lot of it is kind of those basic needs. So I would say just knowing what direction to go once a youth transitions, that's something to know. How to secure food and housing and employment while being independent. How to receive support from church and friends and being in community. It can be very uncomfortable in a family setting and just trying to figure out how do you integrate into that in this new phase of life. And then I will say the last, I think a lot of the areas come back to financial literacy, just knowing how to manage money and use that money. Because when I got so lucky, when I moved here, I got 8 younger siblings as in-laws. And I always mistake and call them my nephews and nieces. I'm like, wait, you guys are my brothers-in-laws and sisters-in-law. And they're in that realm now. They were from what I would call a pretty stable family. And they're in that realm now to learn some of these skills. And it's just like, it's one of those things that you have to sit down with someone and talk about it. And so I told my family, as I go through this initiative, as I reconnected with some of them, their stories are probably going to come out from time to time. And it's just how it is. So my younger brother, he came to live with me for a while after he left the foster home. And he told me he needed to pay for something. He told me he was going to pay for something with his tax refund. And I said, you didn't have a job. You don't get a tax refund. And he thought that everyone got a tax refund at the end of the year, that you just get a tax refund. And I said, who told you that? And he's like, well, all my friends are getting a tax refund. I said, because they had jobs. So just even explaining that basic concept can be very helpful to someone in walking them through some of these areas. So that's what I see, volunteers. I see people, especially if you're retired and you're like, what do I do with all this time? I see just teaching a skill to someone, whether it's cooking, how to properly clean, prepare food, how to file taxes. Those are some things that someone needs to know that there's a way to get help on that. And so I think you can go to the last slide, my favorite slide, the final slide, I think it should be. Yeah, so this is my family, my wife Amy and our 2 kids, Jet and Rezi. When I think about this being a family organization, that's really what it's become. I try to take Fridays to just give my wife some breathing room and spend time with the kids, work on the nonprofit work. And as an attorney, that's a very difficult thing to do, to tell your clients, I'm not available on Friday, because that seems to be when they always want help. And so I've decided that that's the time that we invest in family and just learning some of these skills, learning to volunteer. They probably didn't know this when they joined this family, but they're going to be servant-hearted, whether they want to or not. I'm going to just show them how to just serve people. So we get to meet really unique people in our lives and just try to share some of our stories, share some of our skills. And so what we're doing next in the next month or so is we're doing an event called Operation Care Package. We're going to try to provide 5 care packages to youth who are getting ready to transition out of foster care or who have recently transitioned into independent living or in a college or vocation program or even just starting a job. So what that looks like is just really reaching out to someone and just saying, hey, we are thinking about you, we're praying for you, or we're rooting you on from the sidelines. And I think sometimes just that small little effort can be so huge. And I remember people doing that for me, and that was really neat to have people thinking about me. Oftentimes everyone will say, oh, you're an attorney, like you must be very smart. And I don't know, I think that what it was the community that supported me, the village that helped to raise me from a very early age. I was so blessed to have that, and not everyone has that experience to where people even today, I don't even know the people that were there helping me, and I'll learn about them in so many different ways. And I thought, I want to give back in this way. I want my family to be representative of that. And I think the hardest job that we have is just finding and identifying someone and using your story to say, we share this common thread. And I think even now, as I get older, I'll talk with people, in their 60s, in their 70s, who grew up in the foster care system. We would never know that if we didn't get to that place in our conversations, in our relationships. Now, that doesn't need to be like a conversation starter, but I do think your childhood influences so much about how you grow up. And so there are people out there that are broken and hurting and trying to figure out how they navigate the world in whatever circumstance they find themselves. And so I just remember that so vividly, and now I want that to be a place where we give back. And so really, I left a flyer on the table there and some stickers just with our little thing on it, logo on it. And I think what I want that to be a reminder of is just knowing what can everyday people do to help. And I think the main challenge we have is just identifying, our mission field and being in our mission field. And I think the more and more I pray about that, I'm like, God, I know there are people who need to be served. I just don't know, I'm not going to put up a sign and saying, former foster youth, make a line here. But I think just being able to share our story, share what we want to do, it's been amazing, even over the last week, of seeing people say, I know someone in this circumstance, I don't know what to say, but I'm sure you've got something. And so The last thing I want to leave you with is we have our website that has a ton of just articles, information, and I kind of just tell more of the truth about this process. I think when I left my foster home, there was no like preparation. I felt like it was sort of time served. You can go, and I was thinking, like, do I just leave? Like, no one told me, like, you're done. You're no longer in the system. And so one day, a friend of mine brought her truck and helped me move up to college, and then I just left. And I was thinking that was such a weird time. Like, I just kind of like left the home forever, and no one really prepared me for that time frame. And then I was thinking, am I going to get in trouble? Like, am I even allowed to leave? And just not knowing what to do next is what really terrified me. And so as we get people coming to us and saying, here's some ways, some people we could see need help, can you help them? And I always say, we'll see, we'll talk with them, and we'll see what their story is and where they are in life. Because unfortunately, a lot of people aren't in this realm where they've had a healthy community and built healthy relationships to transition into. That's not the common process or common thing we find. And so that's what we want to do. So you can visit our website, charterfamilyfoundation.org, read some of that. And then we have this thing, I don't know if you've heard of a podcast, but apparently that's what everyone's doing. We have a podcast we started because I just want to find a way that if someone doesn't have enough time or can't give of their service, you can share things with people and say, whatever way we need to reach you, we will reach you. And we'll just provide some answers to some lifelong questions. So I appreciate you letting me come and to your church today and really just jump in, and for Dave and all that he's helped me do. So thank you so much.
Wow, thank you so much, man. There are some tangible ways. I will send out this information via email. Also, if you want to be involved, especially in the care package deal that's coming up, maybe send me an email or drop it in the box with your donation, with your giving. So we're starting a new series this week called Embrace the Struggle. And I struggle with, see, there we go. I think sometimes in the church, sometimes as followers of Jesus, we kind of go into difficulties with the wrong attitude. I think sometimes what we try and do is tell people either everything's going to be fine, or we say, you just need to have paste on a smile over it. And the reality is life is difficult. The reality there is a struggle. And I think one of the reasons people sometimes that we have a hard time sharing the love of Christ with people is that we are shallow in our understanding of the actual pain people go through. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. So what does it mean to understand the reality of the pain of life, understand the reality of the difficulty of life, and in the middle of that, be able to embrace that not as a way to fix it, not as a way to change it, not as a way to demand that it feel better, but as a way to show the grace and peace and love of God in the middle of it, both in our own lives and in others. I think what happens is, and especially in this time of people walking away, we just see, at least in America, a large leaving of the church. People, for the first time, they're saying in the next few years, for the first time, more people will say they do not believe in God than do. We've already seen drastic numbers of people leaving formal religion, formal church. And sadly, I think I can understand that a lot of times. Sometimes there's a lot of stuff driving people away. Usually it's sadly the church, not Jesus. People are not usually walking away from Jesus necessarily. They're walking away from the church. But one of the things, though, that people struggle with, and I hear this all the time when I'm counseling and praying, and especially with recovery work, when I'm meeting with people, they judge God's care and love for them based on, is their life comfortable? Or are they getting the relief they think they deserve or expect or hope for from God? And when he does not answer those questions the way they want, it causes them to not feel like God is actually loving. And I totally get that. I actually really understand that. If you've prayed to God and been on your knees and cried out to him and you've been in pain and there's something going on and someone you love is hurting or your business is failing or your children are struggling or you have health issues or whatever the stuff is going on, and you pray to God in all sincerity and nothing changes, it's an understandable conclusion that where is God? Life is a struggle. I think we need to stop judging God's love and care for us on how he helps make my life better, but maybe we should, an inkling of what this should look like, and I'm giving away the whole point of the whole series and the conclusion right now, but maybe knowing God's love and care for us as he, in the middle of a normal life where there's struggle and pain and an imperfect world, gives us the ability to love and care for other people in the middle of that. Maybe it's not making my life better, maybe it's making others' life better. So I'm just going to real briefly, literally 10 minutes, if you can give me, 12 minutes, 11 minutes, somewhere in that ballpark. I want to introduce this. And so the series is Embrace the Struggle. So we're going to start. Point number one is the struggle. What is the struggle? Life is not comfy. We spend way too much of our time pretending, preparing, and working to avoid struggle. And sometimes we try and paste on for other people, whether they're believers or not. We try and make our life look like it's under control, like it's manageable, like we've figured it out. I will admit, every year, I try and do this several times. You guys know my story with addiction, and the 12 steps were super helpful. You'll find some elements in this. So we're going to talk a little bit about that throughout this series. How do we deal with things that are from the outside, and how do we deal with struggles from the inside? There are difficulties in our life that are just because life is difficult, and there's difficulties in our lives that we bring on ourselves because of our behaviors and our attitudes and our beliefs. And I think that there's some answers in here on how to deal with that. So let me just read a couple of passages. And this is Paul writing to the Corinthian church, and he's talking about this very thing. 2 Corinthians 4, 8 through 10 says this, we are pressed on every side by troubles, but we are not crushed. We are perplexed, but we're not driven to despair. We are hunted down, but never abandoned by God. We get knocked down, but we are not destroyed. Through suffering, our bodies continue to share in the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be seen in our bodies. And then in chapter 8, he continues this theme. And here's some verses talking about his own experience. He's giving examples. He's like, life is tough, and yes, we have Jesus and we can survive, but it is in reality, it is actually difficult. And he gives specific examples here. We have been beaten. We have been put in prison. We have faced angry mobs, worked to exhaustion, endured sleepless nights, and gone without food. And then a few verses later, he says, we were ignored even though we are well known. We live close to death, but we're still alive. We've been beaten, but we haven't been killed. Our hearts ache, but we always have joy. We are poor, but we give spiritual riches to others. We own nothing, and yet we have everything. I got to tell you, I love that passage. For one, the main reason I love it, I love the answers. Yes, we're not destroyed. Yes, we still exist. But I like the fact that he is right there acknowledging to the world that life is not perfect. In fact, life is not great. In fact, life is bad. Right? Paul describes his experience, and he says it is not easy. It is not where we say, I think sometimes as believers we try and only talk about the positive, and we think joy is somehow attached to things working out, that I have health and I have wealth and I have a house and I got a great parking spot today, so Jesus must love me. Right? No, Paul's saying, no, we're crushed. We're in pain. We're perplexed. I like that phrase in there in the New Living. We're perplexed. We don't know what to do. We're confused. We're hunted down. Paul had nemesis. Do you have a nemesis? I think some of you are like, yeah, sitting right over there. No. Right? I want to be cool enough to have a nemesis someday. Right? He's like, there are people who are chasing us down. I was thinking about this. I was like, life is pain. And I was trying to remember where I heard that. And that famous quote is from Wesley in The Princess Bride. When he's fighting with her, he says, life, and he's fighting with Buttercup. Those of you, come on, you should know that. Life is pain. Fairly profound for a goofy movie. And Paul's explaining that. He's like, the world is fallen. He's like, our bodies are broken. I worked on the deck all day yesterday. And I got about a third of what I expected to get done because I'm old. And my knees hurt. I can't just get down on the ground. I have to stand up every 2 minutes. And every time I stand up, I make a noise that my dad used to make. Kind of a groany sigh. And as I was working, I hear this call from my neighbor who's working on his deck. And we're both making, it's like this cacophony of weird groans and grunts. Yeah. The reality is our bodies are breaking down. We live on an earth that is filled with entropy, and things are not great. But denial isn't an option. We don't get the option. We don't get to pretend like it's not bad. Paul did not pretend like life wasn't bad. He admitted it. Hey, it's horrible. I've been beaten up. I've been put in jail. I don't get to sleep sometimes. I don't have enough to eat sometimes. I will throw this out, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, but this perspective, some of the stuff that we think is crushing, some of the stuff that we think is this great suffering we're doing for Jesus, if we took 10 seconds and looked at people around the world, we would realize, I have it pretty great. I couldn't pay my car note this week, something like that, and then saying, oh, there are people who, the idea of having a car is crazy. I have some friends who adopted some children from Africa, and they were weeping. They came to America, and they just did not understand the concept that we had so much food that you could drive up and someone would give it to you in your car. The reality is, yes, we suffer in varying degrees because there's sin in the world, is an imperfect world. None of us are perfect. Our bodies are breaking down. The world is breaking down. I'll also throw this in. Sometimes when we're suffering, we got to blame somebody, and we blame it on someone else around us, or we say, I'm suffering for Jesus, when maybe you're suffering for kind of being a jerk. So make sure if you're suffering, it's because it's either the natural way of life or you actually are standing up for Jesus, not being a jerk for Jesus. I'm going to get that bumper sticker. Maybe that'll be it. Don't be a jerk for Jesus. But what it really is, suffering, acknowledging real suffering, admitting that life is not perfect, is a matter of faith. Because if I spend all my time trying to avoid or pretend that there is no suffering, I'm really saying Jesus and God is not enough for me in the middle of this pain. That I have to fix it, or I'm going to demand that God fixes it, or I'm going to pretend it's not enough because I don't think He's got it. Denial is a lack of faith. So we cannot do it. Denial drains us of the ability to actually have faith in a real Jesus. There is pain, and we'll talk more about this next week. But then there's also the embrace. There is the struggle, and there is the embrace. This is not, the embracing the pain is not this. It is not saying, bless this moment. I'm just going to pretend like it's great. It is not praying harder. The answer, embracing doesn't mean praying harder, balling up our fists, demanding more of God. It is not running to something else. I got to admit, this, I'm not a great typist. I use the pincers. And I was typing this, and when I put in pray, the auto-finish, because now my computer is basically like, trust that we got this better than you do. Forget it. We'll fill in what you're thinking. And it put in, I put pray harder is what I meant to type, and it put in party harder. That's not an answer either. I work in recovery. That's the answer a lot of folks have. Life is pain, so I'm going to find a way to anesthetize myself with a substance or an activity. Embracing doesn't mean I don't have emotions. We're not supposed to be Vulcan and pretend like it doesn't bother me. Not in finding escape, not minimizing, not demanding that God fix it or take it away. What it is understanding that a power greater than myself can help me. That God is there and is greater than me and is greater than the struggle and will help me get through it and sustain me. 2 Corinthians 4 again, for a little further on, 16 and 18. That's why we never give up. Though our bodies are dying, our spirits are being renewed every day. For our present troubles are small and won't last very long. They produce in us a glory that vastly outweighs them and will last forever. So we don't look at troubles we can see now. Rather, we fix our gaze on things that cannot be seen. For the things we see now will soon be gone, but the things we cannot see will last forever. Have a little perspective. Embracing means having some perspective. Not only perspective on the rest of the world, but perspective on this. We're going to struggle, and it says it's a short time. It seems like a long time now. But compared to eternity, it is not. Plus, we will be sustained, that there is power. Our broken bodies are sustained by the Spirit of God within us, empowering us every day. I can make those noises when I get up from working on the deck, but the Spirit of God within me encourages me and allows me to take another step and go back down and keep working. It allows me to love people around me. It allows me to care for those who He's brought into my life. Although our life is short, it is a vapor, and thus the troubles that we have here are a vapor. We can be sustained by fixing our eyes on God. Rather than demanding that God fix our life, we fix our eyes on Him. We focus on God in the middle of very real struggles. Embracing the struggle is embracing our faith in God. There is hope here that we will survive, that we will be sustained, that we will be encouraged, that we will be cared for, that we will be loved, and there is hope there. We know that there is an eternity with Him and perfect connection with Him. Eternity is a long time. The struggles we have are short. So we admit that we are loved by God even when life is unfixed. I love this verse, and we'll be done here soon. Matthew 11, 28 through 30. This is one of my kind of theme verses of my life in the last several years. The temptation is to think we've got to do a lot of stuff. We've got to get a lot of stuff right. That we should never be perplexed, and we should never be beaten down, and we should never be depressed. But the reality is no. The reality is we can be all those things, and God still loves us, and God still moves us forward, and God is still growing us. I love this passage. And Jesus said, the words of Jesus says, "Come to me, all of you who are weary, carry heavy burdens, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle of heart, and you will find rest for your soul. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light." I think sometimes when we're carrying the struggle of the world, that is a heavy yoke. When we give it to God, His yoke is light. We need to quit putting the heavy yoke of our own expectations and our own demands of life on the people around us and on ourselves, and give it to Jesus. Have faith that He will sustain us. Have faith that we have the light within us in clay jars that can come burst forth and show the world and care for others, because His yoke is light. We can reach Him because He is reachable, because He reached down to us and experienced His grace. That is a comfort. The perspective we need to have is that this actual struggle, acknowledge what's going on, and know that we have a power greater than ourselves who can restore us, who can help us understand, and who can give us comfort and love and care. That's real faith. Giving control to God, knowing that He's powerful enough and loving enough to fix it, and fix it in the way that He wants it fixed, and will sustain us through it. Embracing the struggle is embracing Jesus, and that's the point. I want to conclude with this. This is the prayer that we read, and we'll probably do this for this entire series. The prayer we read together at the end of every 12-step meeting. Some of you have heard the Serenity Prayer. Most of you haven't heard the whole thing. The Prayer for Serenity by Reinhold Niebuhr. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And then it goes on. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking as Jesus did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy in the next. Amen. I'm going to leave you with this. Another one of my favorite verses. We don't have music at the end, so this will have to count. John 16:33. I've told you all this so that you may have peace in me. Here on earth you'll have many trials and sorrows. But take heart, because I have overcome the world. May we be people who live as ambassadors of the loving, forgiving, and just God in the world as it really is, full of struggle and difficulty that needs us to show His light in the darkness. Have a fantastic week, being the light of Jesus and the love of Jesus for those around you, and we will see you next Sunday. Thank you.